I read Sleep Like Death by Kalynn Bayron. Here is my review. Sleep Like Death is a YA fantasy that has been coined as a Snow White retelling, but in actuality takes influences and inspiration from a lot of Grimm tales. In this novel, we follow our FMC Princess Eve, who has trained her entire life to defeat the evil wish-granting Knight. Night as in like K-N-I-G-T, not night as in like day and night. But when the queen starts acting strangely and secluding herself into her room, and Eve starts to recognize that she might not be powerful enough to defeat the Knight, she begins questioning her purpose. This review is going to contain spoilers, so if you don't want to know anything yet, come back after you've read the book. Like I said, this novel takes us on a really intriguing journey through some of the well-known Grimm folklore. If you don't know what I mean when I say Grimm, I mean the Grimm brothers, who have written down the oral tales that we know, like Snow White or Cinderella or Rapunzel. Those really well-known Disney iterations probably is where you first saw them, of the German folk tales. This is coined as Snow White, and we do get majority and mainly Snow White, but there are hints and dabblings of the other folk tales, and then a twist at the end that really brings in another one. I really enjoyed the mashup of all of these stories because they did not at any point like deter or complicate Eve's story. If you don't know the original Grimm tales, it's going to be fine. But if you do know the original Grimm tales, then getting those little like threads and Easter eggs was pretty fun. I did in college take a German folklore class, so it was like, I don't know, nostalgic for me to read this. The pacing of the plot was pretty quick. We don't spend too long at any one event, so you don't really get to digest or process what has happened. This does also mean that the storyline comes off as rushed and simple. We get very little depth within this story. It's very surface level. What you see is what you get, and then there are no true twists. When I guess I said that there was a twist a little bit earlier, but I meant like a twist is in another fairy tale gets brought in, not necessarily a plot twist. So for those of you who know the Grimm fairy tales, it's a fun little thing that happens at the end, but it's not like a twist to the actual plot. Despite magic being really prevalent in the world and the power of our FMC being extremely important to the plot, there is like no magic system to this story. We get shown Eve's magic quite a bit, which is kind of hilarious because in craft I'm going to talk about the fact that this whole thing is telling instead of showing. So we know why. We eventually learn why, because she was a wish granted, why she has her powers, but we don't know why she has these powers specifically. She just like does, and she's super uber powerful because of them. So there's magic, but no magic system. There's a world, but there's no real world build. There's an attempt at a world build. We know that there's a little bit of famine or something in different parts of the world are mentioned to try and create that initial conflict at the beginning, but it's not really explained. I mean, this is a very surface level fantasy, which kind of works with our FMC. We only get one POV. Our POV is Princess Eve, and our main character is pretty simple as well. At the beginning of the novel and throughout a lot of this novel, Eve is extraordinarily like self-righteous. This girl does not lack confidence. Now, this fierceness born out of immaturity, I think, will appeal to teen readers because they'll be able to grow alongside the character a lot better than an audience like me, an adult picking up this YA. Eve does eventually learn the importance of patience and in working with those around her, kind of. She does kind of learn to, like, not go with her knee-jerk reaction or response and to like hold off and think through what she's going to do before she acts. She is a 16-year-old who turned 17 very early on in the novel, and I think that this would have worked so much better if this character had been like 14 going on 15, because she is so immature and the writing is very low level. So when we move into craft, this book had some really big craft issues. There are a lot of things going on here. I'm not going to speak to all of them because then it starts to get nitpicky. but I will speak to two because these two happened right off the bat. Like within the first two paragraphs, I was like, oh no. And they kept me from ever truly becoming invested in the story because they are craft issues that will create distance between the story and the character and the reader. So the first thing that we get is a lack of filtering. This is written in first person. I'm going to go into what a lack of filtering means in just a second, but for me as a reader, it made this novel like excruciating. On top of creating distance between the reader and the character, this also will stilt the prose to a point where it doesn't feel organic or authentic. And so reading it, maybe you would be able to get away with that. Listening to it, no. So an example of this that I'm reading from page 4 is the text from the book says, "As she busies herself, I spot my helpful friend as he emerges from the underbrush," which should be filtered to, "As she busies herself, my helpful friend emerges from the underbrush." Basically what this means is that we're getting this from Eve's perspective, so we don't need her saying, I did this, I saw this, I heard this, because rather than feeling like we're getting Eve's perspective, it is instead Eve telling us what her perspective was, which is what creates that initial distance, and what, as you go more and more and you get this consistently throughout the text, starts to make the prose really disjointed. The other big issue is the classic telling instead of showing. This one is an obvious one for why it creates distance between the reader and the book. It doesn't allow for an immersive experience because we are being told what is happening. We are being told what we should feel or what the character is feeling rather than letting us just experience alongside the character. And so when that happens and major events occur, it's hard to get the depth of emotion that the author would want you to get because you are not feeling that alongside the character. The character is instead saying, this thing happened and this is how I felt and you should feel that way as well. So because of these two really big, very prevalent craft things that happened for the entirety of the 300 plus pages, I never connected with this text. And then you add to that it's a very low level text. It is truly for teens that are like 14 or 15 years old, which makes it great for the high school library. But even with that being said, even with it being for a lower teen demographic, I'm trying to hold my dog off because he wants to play so bad. The writing still could have been better. Oh, guys, the audio. I'm just going to be blunt and transparent when I talk about the audio of this. The audiobook was extremely stilted and disjointed. It felt like the narrator simply read the text as soon as they got it and then didn't make any adjustments to the recording. It very much felt like a rough draft. There were times where there would be these long pauses because it seems like the narrator lost their place, but because there was no editing that happened, you just get this long pause. There were also instances where the narrator stumbles over a phrase or stumbles over a word or says the wrong word, and you can tell that they said the wrong word, but they didn't go back and re-record that section. It very much felt like the audio narrator didn't care. Which is unfortunate because if the narrator does a bad job, then somebody who's listening to that audio version will put it down and that hurts the author. And I can tell you that if I was not getting an exclusive edition of this from 2 of my book box subscriptions, I would have put this down in the first chapter based on how the audio narration was executed. So overall, I feel like this will be a really good low-level read for teenagers. It's super easy to understand and has a simple plot. It has a relatable FMC that is transitioning into a more mature version of herself. And then we get this intriguing compilation of different fairy tales and folklore from the traditional Grimm brothers stories. That being said, something that teens who read a lot are going to pick up on is definitely the stilted way that the craft is executed, despite the simplicity of the plot. And then also the fact that Eve, being 17 years old, doesn't make sense because she is far too immature to actually come across as 17. She comes across as a 15-year-old, and teens are going to notice that. So it would be a fun read. It would be an intriguing read. It's a good lower level read. It is not going to appeal to adults. If you've read this, let me know what your thoughts were down in the comments. If you happen to have a teen or know a teen who read this, and you're willing to share what their thoughts were, let me know how the actual audience for this book is taking it in. I ended up re-gifting my exclusive editions to a friend of mine's daughter. So I'm curious to see what she has to say.